my mind, look, I'm not a psychologist, but he's not mentally sick, he's just evil. That's all it is. I think it's just evil, and I just wish that our justice system would identify evil opposed to mentally sick, because he's evil.
First, he killed his brother.
He's my son and I love him. Just stop hurting people.
And then he tried to kill his closest friend.
Jonathan Dick has struck a Keilor dad with a hammer.
When I stood up, I said, let's do this, motherfucker.
Adam Shan digs deep to discover the truth about Jonathan Dick.
So what happened?
Oh, drugs.
You're convinced it's just
Drugs, yeah.
And finds a family living in fear.
When will you be satisfied this is all over?
When he dies.
Mystery surrounds the death of a man at a shopping centre in Melbourne's east this morning. Nine's Laura Spurway reports from the scene.
There's still a heavy police presence here. Forensics have arrived and homicide detectives are on the scene, examining an area near a set of lifts in this shopping centre car park in Doncaster. This level of the car park is closed off as police continue their extensive investigations.
On February 3rd, 2017, a brutal murder happened here, outside the lift in the car park of this suburban shopping centre. David Dick was on his way to work when he was attacked by a man wielding a samurai sword and a knife. Days later, police released security camera footage of the lead-up to the incident, and the killer was revealed. David Dick was murdered by his own brother, 40-year-old Jonathan Dick.
That actual day that I found out that he'd killed David, I was a bit panicked.
David Camerata was working at his jewellery business in Melbourne on the day the CCTV footage was released.
Yeah, I was at work and I heard David's name on the radio. I jumped on the computer and I got it up on the screen, and there was a vision of Jono, the CCTV, pinned by the lift with the sword in the bag. Could have showed me that CCTV from, 20, 30 metres away. I would have picked it straight away, no problems.
David Camerata knew the man with the sword very well. It was Jonathan Dick, the best man at his wedding to Danny. David phoned Danny straight away.
He just said, I think Jono has killed his brother. I could hear the terror in David's voice and your heart skips a beat.
David Camerata had once called Jonathan Dick his best friend. They'd both grown up here in Wallen, the last stop on the edge of Melbourne. At the age of 13, Jonathan had moved from a private school in suburban Malvern to a state school in the middle of nowhere. David had welcomed the new kid, but there was always something different about Jono.
He was always odd from day one, but he was like, we were just friends, childhood friends, so, there was nothing sinister back then. We lived behind each other, we lived on acre properties. We used to sort of just hang out after school, watch music videos and just general kid stuff,
David Camerata enjoyed a stable upbringing. However, his friend's life was anything but stable. Jonathan's parents had divorced when he was 7 and until the age of 13, he lived with his mother Carol in Melbourne. But then he was sent to live with his father and stepmother in Wallen.
His dad had a sausage factory, and he's a nice enough guy, but he's just a bit quirky. And at one point they were sort of trying to dig a swimming pool in the backyard, like hand dig it. So if I'd go up to visit him, you know, we'd spend our evenings in the back with a shovel, you know, trying to hand dig a pool, you know. Just little things like that. It's just a strange place.
And it was always sausages for dinner.
Always sausages.
Jonathan's living arrangements were also unusual. His father lived with his stepmother and their kids in the main house, while Jonathan lived in a shed out the back, all on his own.
He was a loner type character. I mean, he sort of lived in his shed, and yeah, we used to go there and all hang out. You know, for us it was fun. For him it was obviously his reality. Definitely now that I look back on it, there was a lot of red flags.
Jonathan Dick was obsessed by comics, especially The Punisher, a dark character with psychological issues. The Punisher was a vigilante driven by revenge, routinely extorting, kidnapping, torturing and murdering those who wronged him.
He was trying to push me to read it. He gave me quite a thick hard copy of that comic, and I mean...
The Punisher? The
Punisher. I mean, I wasn't a comic book person, but I tried to read it, and I got maybe 2 pages in, and I'm like, this is not for me, you know.
He decides who can live and who doesn't, and all that sort of thing, and it's unfortunately a little bit...
Revenge, I think, was a big thing for him.
Danny Camerata also grew up in Wallen and fell in love with David at Whittlesea Secondary College. They got engaged soon after graduating. Jonathan was also a fixture in David's life, but Danny could never work out why.
I couldn't relate to him in any way. We just had nothing in common whatsoever.
When a date was set for the wedding, David asked Jonathan to be his best man.
Still speaking to him regularly. I wasn't seeing him that often, but I was, you know, he was a long-time friend, and, you know, we'd sort of grown together, so yeah, I did ask him.
I don't know anyone else who's first boyfriend and girlfriend and now they're getting married 12 years later, so it's quite incredible. Give them a round of applause.
How were you about that?
I was a bit, shocked.
What was the wedding present?
He got a membership for David, a Richmond membership. I'm not into the football, and I think that sort of is a clear indication of his thoughts of the friendship. It was just, you know, David and him doing what he likes.
The newlyweds started a family and bought a house in Keilor, which they intended to turn into their dream home. By then, Jonathan was a qualified plasterer.
He approached me to do the plaster work in the house, and I said, look, that's perfectly fine, you know, with me. He didn't have a licence at the time, so he was travelling by train from Ringwood all the way over to Keilor. And that's where I started to notice things weren't quite right.
Like what?
I broke a tiny piece of plaster. You know, it would have only been the size of an iPhone. He just lost it. He was, you know, carrying on, and it was just really odd behaviour I hadn't seen out of him before. It wasn't full aggression, but it was really odd.
And when David would ring Jonathan to check on progress, Jonathan would hang up on him.
You couldn't please this guy?
No, there was no pleasing him. Didn't matter what you did.
The friendship ended over fast food. Jonathan had asked for pizza while he was working. When it arrived, Jonathan complained bitterly that it was too big. David had enough and sacked Jonathan from the job. They didn't see each other for 5 years until late one night in 2013. Jonathan turned up unannounced at David and Danny's home.
We were at home one night and the kids were asleep and the doorbell rang. And it was quite late. I think it was about 11 o'clock at night.
That was odd for someone just to pop in at that time.
Called out who was there and he said, it's me, Jono. And I said, oh, you know, what do you want, basically?
I was sort of listening by the window. David, he yelled out to me that it's Jono, and then he quickly said, he's got a knife.
In February 2017, Jonathan Dick killed his brother David with a samurai sword in a suburban shopping centre. When he heard, Jonathan's old friend David Camerata thought back to 4 years earlier, when a paranoid and delusional Jonathan had turned up at his house armed with a knife.
He said, oh, I really need to speak to you, it's really urgent. If you come outside, I'll put the knife down. I was obviously shocked at that. So I said, just put the knife under the door and I'll come out and have a chat with you. I then told him I'd go out and speak to him. But got to empty his pockets onto the bonnet of my car and sit down in the middle of the driveway with his hands on his head, which he did all that. He was quite submissive.
You've called the police.
Yep.
But they don't come.
No, 45 minutes, basically, it took them to come.
I managed to get him in the car. I thought I'll get him away from the house. So when we were on the way to the train station, yeah, he was just rambling and talking some pretty crazy stuff. So got him on the train. Went back home. I'd actually been home for at least 5 or 10 minutes before the police had arrived.
The police advised us because there was no threat, there was no lunge, there was no, I'm going to kill you. They couldn't do anything. There's no charge.
But how did you feel?
Sick.
Jonathan was suffering undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia. He was finding it difficult to discern reality from delusion. He had travelled all the way from Seymour to David and Danny's house, 3 or 4 hours by public transport, trains, buses, and then on foot. He was seeking answers from his friends for the voices in his head.
I was a bit disappointed that there was nothing you can do. Someone can come to your house in the middle of the night with a knife and the police can't really do anything if there's no real threat. I think that's, you know, those actions are a threat in itself.
The late-night encounter with Jonathan was startling enough, but he wasn't finished yet. He came by David's work the next day. He wanted his knife back. David said to go and ask the police. They now had the knife. He made it clear to Jonathan to never, ever return to his house. That was the last that David expected to see of his former friend, 4 years before he killed his brother.
There wasn't an argument that broke out into a fight and then he killed his brother. He attacked him from behind. He waited, he planned, he stalked him. He waited for him to come out of that lift and he struck him from behind. That's a monster. That's not anything but a monster.
David and Danny were living in terror, wondering if they were next on Jonathan's kill list.
What precautions did you take at that point?
We left home straight away and stayed somewhere else. We were just terrified that he would, we were fearful that maybe he would come for David.
Jonathan Dick killed his brother David on February the 3rd. But it took Victoria Police 4 days to release the CCTV footage showing Jonathan with the sword outside the lift. That same day, his mother Carol issued a public appeal. Strangely, she did not realise the killer in the footage was her son.
Why does this happen? But my son has been murdered. Viciously. David was the most beautiful, fun-loving, magical person. And we all loved him so much.
The next day, Victoria Police tried to explain why his own mother had not recognised him.
Not one of them had an inkling that this could have even been a possibility. And even when we spoke to Carol this morning, she's coming to terms with it, but I really don't believe she has any belief that it is.
He said, "We think it's Jonathan." And I looked at him in shock. I said, "Don't be ridiculous."
I shouldn't really judge her. You don't know what you would do in that situation. For us to sit back and look at it, it's a bit odd that you wouldn't recognise your son when everyone that knows him clearly
That's Jono,
says,
look at him, haircut, shape, walk, everything.
The way he looked the majority of his life.
Kind of in denial, I think you'd probably say.
The delay in identifying Jonathan gave him a head start of nearly a week on police, enough time to plan his next move.
Police have released CCTV footage of Jonathan Dick walking off after abandoning his car in East Ivanhoe. They've confirmed a sword used in the attack was found in the vehicle.
They say he withdrew $200 just 2 days before the killing, and he hasn't accessed his bank account since or used his mobile phone.
What we've been told is he would periodically go missing for days and sometimes weeks at a time.
I had said to a mutual friend of ours that they won't find him. I said that straight away after he'd murdered his brother. He's quite intelligent.
Jonathan had gone off the grid. He wasn't using credit cards. He wasn't on social media. 2 theories were doing the rounds. He'd taken his own life, or he disappeared interstate.
It was more likely that he had gone interstate. That's what I thought. That he'd had another car and he just drove interstate.
A year passed and the whereabouts of Jonathan Dick remained a mystery. David and Danny Camerata moved back home and were trying to get on with their lives. Then on August 20, 2018, Jonathan Dick was listed as number 2 on Australia's Most Wanted.
I think we just were a bit optimistic and hopeful that he just disappeared.
What was happening that morning?
One of my kids was about to do an athletics district race, so we woke up to the kids quite excited fully dressed in their uniforms. It was one of those really happy mornings where everything was going right and everyone was laughing and giggling. And we said goodbye to David and he walked down the stairs.
As I got to the second level of stairs, I felt something hit me in the side of the head. Stumbled back, and then that's when I turned around and saw a guy coming towards me, and he's holding a hammer. It took me a little bit to sort of figure it out, and then I realised it was him.
He said something to you?
He said, "You had this coming."
And what did you say back to him?
When I stood up, I said, "Let's do this, motherfucker."
In August 2018, a camera on a council garbage truck captured this vision outside David and Danny Camerata's home in Keilor.
I heard a man shout, so I opened the blinds and had a look, and I could see David and someone else wrestling near the footpath. David yelled out, "It's Jono," and I knew straight away.
There was a moment where Jono realised you were there and it changed things.
He looked a bit surprised, almost as if he didn't want to do it with an audience. He changed from fight to flight.
I was watching him run up the street, and that's when I ran over and grabbed the hammer, took off after him.
Luckily for Jonathan, David abandoned the chase.
What would you have done if you'd caught him?
I probably would have hit him in the head with the hammer, for sure, yeah. That's what I would have done.
A neighbour's security camera recorded Jonathan's escape on a bicycle. David was lucky he wasn't killed. Jonathan had only managed to land a glancing blow on David's neck with a plasterer's hammer filed down to a sharp point.
I could feel the amount of blood sort of trickling down. It was almost like a tap. The blood had all sort of balled up in the back of my neck, and it was pretty horrible.
David recovered from his injuries, but a scar is a permanent reminder of his near-death experience. Jonathan had used the same plan in the murder of his brother and the attempted murder of David Camerata. He lay in wait, striking with a samurai sword for his brother and a hammer for his former best friend. Then he had a knife to finish off his victims.
A big blow followed by a coup de grace with the knife?
I think so, yeah. So I think when he's hit me with the hammer, the knife is either... I've tried to look at the footage to see it, but it's either dropped out of his pocket and gone underneath my stairwell, or he's hid that knife there to wait until I'm knocked out and then go and grab it and finish me off on the driveway.
But you stayed on your feet?
Stayed on my feet, yeah, so...
That's what saved you?
Yeah, it did. I've always had a half-decent chin, so it saved me.
Jonathan Dick was behaving as if he was the Punisher, the comic book hero that he loved so much. He sought revenge over those he believed had wronged him. Jonathan and David Dick had an argument over money when they shared a house. Much later, Jonathan killed his brother. Jonathan tried to kill David Camerata over a series of imaginary issues related to his mental illness. There was no single event in his life that caused Jonathan's psyche to collapse so completely. What was he like as a kid in terms of his temperament?
He was just calm and kind, nice. He didn't get in trouble at school. I don't remember him getting mad or upset about anything.
Emma Beattie was drawn to Jonathan in 1991 when he arrived at Whittlesea Secondary College from an exclusive private school in Melbourne. They became best friends.
I just felt really comfortable around him. I could be myself, talk about anything, and there was never any judgment from him. He was just really easy to be around, really kind.
And what about for him? What did you represent for him?
I can only guess that maybe I represented some sort of stability for him. I had a pretty stable home life.
They laughed and cried together, as best friends do. But eventually Jonathan revealed he wanted more.
We'd been out at a party and we ended up just back at someone's house. There was a whole group of us. He was sleeping on the floor and I was up on the bed and we were just talking. He told me that he was in love with me, and I did, you know, I loved him too. I just didn't love him the way that he had felt about me at that time. He said to me, you know, get it. I've never told anybody that I loved them before, not even my mum. And yeah, I was just silent. Just one of those moments where you don't know what to say. I didn't want to say anything to hurt him because he was just so important to me.
You even briefly thought about, well, maybe we could give it a go or something.
Yeah, maybe. But those words never came. So I think that there was a reason for that.
Emma got married, had children, and she wished the same for her old friend, Jonathan.
So what happened?
Drugs.
You're convinced it's just drugs?
Yeah, yeah.
And what was he doing?
From what I know, marijuana, but it was pretty constant. It was every day.
Years after they grew apart, Jonathan called Emma out of the blue. He urgently wanted to see her.
And he was not the same person that I had seen years before.
Jonathan told Emma he'd been having visions. He sprouted conspiracy theories involving old classmates. And then...
He told me that he wanted to kill people, that his mum was a serial killer, talk about wanting to slit people's throats, and it was, yeah, really scary.
So out of character.
Yeah, yeah.
Emma was shocked to hear Jonathan was capable of murder, but not as shocked as his mother, Carol.
Jonathan there, laughing still, which is wonderful.
They look like very normal boys.
They are.
Brothers.
They are, and they were great brothers together.
Carol never gave up on Jonathan, even after he killed his brother. Instead, she searched for him.
I would get on the trains and walk around Melbourne streets just looking.
Who's been doing that?
I did that in the beginning.
How many times?
3, but I didn't tell the detectives because I really thought if I found him, I'd probably hide him.
Following the attempted murder of David Camerata, Jonathan goes to ground again, evading all attempts by police to find him. He's high on the list of Australia's most wanted, and many of his former friends are living in fear, wondering if they're next on the Punisher's kill list. But he still has one staunch ally, his mum.
He's my son and I love him. Just stop hurting people. Hand yourself in and get the help you need.
Coming up, a family under immense pressure.
If we crumbled, then our kids would have crumbled and suffered.
And the fugitive comes out of hiding.
I turned it down and I just said, it's him. He's here.
of Australia's most wanted men strikes again. 18 months after allegedly killing his brother David with a samurai sword, Jonathan Dick unleashed another vicious attack. He then fled, prompting a large-scale search on the ground and in the air. By afternoon, the mounted branch had joined the search, with a particular focus on the parkland around Green Gully Reserve as the manhunt intensified.
It's difficult to conceive how he's managed to evade police for 18 months and not be given up.
This was an extraordinary situation for Victoria Police. Jonathan had gone to ground again. Apparently he was living somewhere in Victoria, but he left no digital footprint. He wasn't accessing his bank accounts, nor contacting anyone he knew. David Camerata had survived the hammer attack and given Jonathan a solid beating. In his heart, though, David knew that Jonathan would be back to try again.
It sort of terrorised you 24/7. For David, it was the nightmares, the night terrors. And then obviously being terrorised during the day, so he really had no relief. From the morning, I'd wake up and it would be making sure he got to his car alive. Checking cameras and making it safe for him just to get to his car. I would track him on my phone to make sure he got to the car park safe. Then there would be that 10 minutes of absolute terror of him getting out of the car park to his work safely.
Every trip to and from work, every trip to the bathroom and back, you know, in my workplace, you know, every venture into the stairwell, every walk outside was just ready for war, basically. I had a feeling that he would be watching. I was constantly looking around. And in the city, it gets pretty tiring because you got people walking past you constantly. So trying to keep a distance between people and constantly face scanning makes you pretty tired, but you got to do it.
It was during this terrible period after the hammer attack that the Cameratas invited me into their lives as I was making a podcast on their case. They're a wonderful and brave family, and I tried to reassure them that everything would turn out for the best. The police would get Jonathan. I kept saying to you, oh, David will be all right. He's not coming back. You got over him. He knows he can't get you this. He knows, you know, and you were nodding, yes, oh, I agree. But I know you didn't really agree. What did you think underneath?
Yeah, broken sleeps constantly. Any noise you hear at night, you sort of, you know, you panic a little bit. You get that sort of fight response. The nightmares came from lots of different things, from me attacking him attacking me.
At night, David was forced to relive the hammer attack over and over again. By day, he was tormented by the idea that he had failed everyone, including his own family, when Jonathan had escaped.
What they were going through was a direct result of me not holding on to him that day. And although there was a lot of positives, that was a huge negative for me, for sure. Danny, the way she's been able to look after the boys throughout this, she's constantly looking after everyone in the house. She's amazing with the kids. It's been hell for her, absolutely hell. She lost a lot of weight and she's obviously quite a petite lady as it is. I had some concerns for her, but she's as strong as they come. She's basically kept us all afloat.
I just had to be, and David had to be strong for them. Like, we did not have breathing space to crumble, because if we crumbled, then our kids would have crumbled and suffered. One of my kids, after a soccer game, just broke down because he could hear all his friends saying, "Come to my house, come to my house." And he couldn't say that. He couldn't say, "Come to my house," just the little things like that. Celebrating birthdays in your own home, not having birthday parties, just telling your kids that they have to withhold so much of themselves. It just really took a toll on them. Their innocence was taken completely. My kids for 12 months weren't raised by their parents. They were raised by, like, shadows of their parents.
This family lived in a state of hypervigilance for more than 12 months. They moved homes, they changed their routines, and they hired private security. And David started carrying a knife in his car. If Jonathan was planning another sneak attack, David thought that Jonathan would try to get him at his work. His jewellery business had been at the same address in the city for years, and Jonathan had been there before.
David had begun driving to work in a convoy with his colleague, Dion Raiola. Dion would be backup if Jonathan ambushed David. Both men had taken lessons in jiu-jitsu. If Jonathan was preparing to strike again, David and Dion would be ready for him.
As you pull into the parking space, what do you see?
I hopped out of my car, I was putting my jacket on. I looked over my shoulder, my right shoulder, and I saw a guy with a hat on, pulled right down, and he was standing on Flinders Street, just in a little gap.
What you're seeing is a sliver of a face, effectively.
A slither, yeah. I could see his frame. As soon as I made eye contact, he turned his head like someone had been spotted doing something they shouldn't. He's turned to walk away. I turned to Dion and I just said, "It's him. He's here."
David Camerata's getting out of his car when he spots a shadowy figure in the car park. It's Jonathan Dick, the killer who's terrorised his family for 2.5 years. But this time, David has the upper hand. After all this wondering and waiting for Jonathan, David has the chance to end this ordeal right there in the car park.
I turned to Dion and I just said, "It's him, he's here." Dion's like, "No." And I said, "Yeah, it's him." I just took off sprinting just after him. He'd walked up Hosier Lane, past the restaurant there on the corner, and I chased him.
David caught up to Jonathan halfway up the lane.
I said, "Hey," at first. He wouldn't look. I grabbed hold of his jumper, but he's a pretty big guy, and as he's turned to run, I've slipped over, tripped on one of the cobblestones.
Dick ran down Hosier Lane back onto Flinders Street towards the spot where David first saw him lurking. His meticulous plan to murder David was now falling apart. He ran headlong into Dion, David's workmate. Dion wrestled the much larger man to the ground. There would be no escape this time.
I kicked him in his head a couple of times. Dion put him in a rear naked choke. He was begging Dion for a minute or so to kill him. You know, I said a few things to him.
What did you say?
I told him that I'm not like him. You know, I'm not a killer. What he'd done to his brother was disgusting, and you know, a few other things in there you probably wouldn't want to put to air. I knew it was done. We waited for the police to come, and police put the cuffs on.
Australia's most dangerous fugitive is tonight behind bars, captured in a car park after 2.5 years on the run.
Bloodied and barely recognisable, Jonathan Dick's time on the run is over.
Everyone's happy that he's caught. Davo can sleep easy now, so we're all good.
We hugged each other, me and Dion. It was pretty crazy. It was one thing I'll never forget. It was like just a massive weight just been lifted completely. I called my wife, obviously, and talked to her. She was pretty shocked, and then I think she's called you afterwards.
That's right. I was shocked then.
Yeah.
Everyone was shocked. What happened next?
It's a bit corny, but the kids and I were just jumping up and down and screaming and hugging and just, yeah, celebrating. They were just so happy. They were just so happy. So it was just this massive relief.
Mum and Dad put things right. Dad caught the bad guy. Do they know that?
Yeah, they do. They've changed the screensavers to shots of their dad and Dion.
That weight, the idea that you'd let him go in Keilor, but you'd finish the job.
Everything that we thought was going to happen did happen, and every good thing that could have happened did happen as well. So thankful for that. It did take me a week to sort of calm down a little bit. I was still on edge, and I was still thinking whether or not the whole thing had actually happened. It wasn't just a dream. Little things, putting the bins out at night time without a weapon in your hand, or walking out your front door knowing that no one's about to jump out and, you know, try and kill you is a really pleasant thing.
He was caught. You saw all the footage on the news. What was your reaction to it?
I felt seeing him in handcuffs was hard. That was hard, hiding his head.
Emma felt she had to reach out, so she wrote to Jonathan in jail.
It was a very short letter, and it just said, I wanted to make sure you're okay. I know you came to me for help a few years ago, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to help you more. If you would like to call me, you can. This is my number. About a week later, he called me.
Heart skipped a beat?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Next, will justice ever be served?
When will you be satisfied this is all over?
When he hasn't got a heartbeat, that's when I'll sleep a lot easier at night.
Jonathan Dick's old school friend Emma Beattie wrote to him in jail soon after his arrest in August 2019. A week later, he called her.
Do you recall the first words he said?
Hello, hello, Em, hello, hello. And it was, Jono. And just a million things running through my mind.
Take us through the conversation.
I asked him if he was okay, and he said, yep.
How did he strike you in his demeanour and his sense of reality?
He seemed really confident, which was a different Jono to the Jono I remember. He was really just this bravado that there was. He's happy with how things have turned out. That's what I felt from speaking to him.
That he'd done the right thing.
Yeah. I asked him if he had a kill list because that had been reported. You obviously think, oh, am I going to be on it? And he said no, but I wouldn't have minded knowing where lived. And I said, why? I said, I don't remember you ever having an issue with him. And he said, I can't tell you that because the call's recorded.
We can't reveal the name of Jonathan's next prospective victim for legal reasons. Here again, Jonathan seemed to have a clear intention and a motive to keep on killing people.
Did he seem to have a sense of what he'd done and what the consequences were?
Yeah, he was very accepting of his situation. He said, I'm obviously going to be in here for a while, meaning the prison. And yeah, he just was really, yeah, it's okay in here, it's okay.
And by comparison to being on the run, what did he say about the comparison jail or being on the run?
Oh, he said being on the run was really pretty cool, actually. He said he just went wherever he wanted and did whatever he wanted.
Is that remarkable?
Yeah.
And everyone got it wrong.
Yeah. I said, well, Jono, did you know you're Australia's most wanted? And he said, I was just living in North Fitzroy.
Just living in North Fitzroy?
Mm-hmm.
This is Rushall Community Garden. It's about 100 metres from a train station and barely concealed by some shrubs here. This is where Jonathan Dick hid in plain sight on and off for 2.5 years. He told police later that he knew if he had no digital footprint, they would never find him. At one stage, police did approach him, but he gave a false name. He knew exactly how to maintain his freedom while he waited to execute David Camerata. I captured some images of the hideout on my phone the day after Dick was arrested.
So here I am at the campsite of Jonathan Dick.
He lived in a tent, which also had a tarp for wet weather. Inside the tent, he had a mattress, pillows, fresh and processed food, spares for the bike he travelled around on, and newspapers, some from the month of his arrest. While I was searching for Jonathan Dick all across Australia, he was living just 2 kilometres from my home here in Melbourne. Who would have thought that a killer would be living in a tent by a railway station and that Yarra City Council would have inadvertently assisted him? Under human rights protocols, the council cannot demand the identity of the homeless. Instead, they offer all kinds of services, no questions asked. If he hadn't tried to murder David Camerata, who knows how long he could have remained here?
When Jonathan was arrested in 2019, a very long jail sentence seemed a formality. There was no doubt about his guilt.
All David and Danny wanted was a number, how long Jonathan Dick would be in prison for. Given the long-term meticulous planning, police believed he would get up to 35 years behind bars. However, his legal team went for the mental health defence, alleging that Jonathan was not responsible for anything he did on the grounds of mental impairment. The judge accepted that, and Jonathan Dick has been admitted to a secure psychiatric hospital until such time as he's well enough to return to the community.
I think this would make people shake their heads at the end of this story, to see the extreme violence, the planning, the evasion of police, killing of his brother, attempts to kill you not once but twice, and at the end of all this, not guilty. How does that sit?
You know, I know it sounds corny, but we have, like, a perfect marriage. I've got perfect kids. We've built a perfect life. I'm happy with my job. I'm happy with my family. You're happy with your business. Everything is going well for us, and we're very grateful for the life we've built. And then there's this fat piece of shit sitting there that has just ruined our lives. And then you've got a pathetic legal system that cares more for him and his rehabilitation than us. We pay tax, we've followed the rules, we've built a life, we support the community. You know, I work for a hospital, it means shit. Excuse the language, but it means shit.
A tribunal of doctors will decide when Jonathan is well enough to return to the community. Under the law, David and Danny will have no right to be notified when that happens.
He is not a prisoner, he is a patient.
You start to have a look at how long people stay in that facility, which is on average, I believe, about 10 years. They'll release him back out on the streets, and I mean, it's okay when he's on medication, I'm sure, but as soon as he's off it, you see what happens.
Will that fear ever go away? How often are the dreams coming now?
Several times a night.
Yeah,
still.
probably at least a couple of times a night, and they're generally pretty violent in nature.
Danny and David feel the justice system has not acknowledged how they have suffered or recognised the very real concerns about their safety.
In my mind, look, I'm not a psychologist, but he's not mentally sick, he's just evil. That's all it is. I think it's just evil, and I just wish that our justice system would identify evil opposed to mentally sick, because he's evil.
When will you be satisfied this is all over?
When he dies, when he hasn't got a heartbeat, that's when I'll sleep a lot easier at night.